Fáilte, welcome to this episode of The Language Question, Ceis na Tangan, a conversation about the Irish language and its history for anyone curious about their relationship with it and its role in our identity. Tásúla gom go bhfuil sos deas agat thar an nullag. I hope you had a wonderful break over Christmas. Tá mí díreach ag teacht ar ais go dtí an podcréile I gcóir fiche fiche ceathair. We are just returning to the podcast for 2024. Agus tá ruúin na hathbhliain agam. And I have a New Year's resolution. Le roinntwa bliain anuas bhí drogal orm mo cuid Gaeilgeoir a úsáid go fabli. For some time now, I have been reluctant to use my Irish in public. Ceapas nach raibh an lór chumas Gaeilgeoir agam. I thought that I wasn't able to speak Irish well enough. Ach caithfidh mé I a labhairt. But I have to use it. Mar sin, an ruúin na hathbhliain atá gom im Líne ná níos mó Gaeilgeoir a úsáid sa podcréile sa. So, my New Year's resolution for 2024 is to use more Irish here in the podcast. Bead ag súil le do chainneacht agus do hiiscint a chara. I would be grateful for your patience and understanding as I try this experiment. Well, sin ráite, that said, our guest in this episode, our san episode sa, ná Mollie Guidera. Our guest in this episode is Mollie Guidera. Mollie is an exceptional Irish language teacher and the founder of Irish with Mollie. Is múntóir ionta Gaeilgeoir I Mollie, agus búnathóir Irish with Mollie I. As always, I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate and review the show. Mar is gnách bead tharbheith buíoch as the aseolais agus the hahiú. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your complimentary valuable learning resources and to ensure that you stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Anyway, here goes with this episode. I hope you enjoy it. Tásúla gom muine tú soltas. Mollie Guidera is the founder of Irish with Mollie. She has a Cambridge certificate in teaching and has been teaching languages internationally for over 9 years, during which time she discovered that what energized her the most is immersing herself and learners in the Irish language, which led her to establish Irish with Mollie, where she leads an international community of Irish language learners using online classes and resources, a 24-hour Zoom community and meetups for learners with WhatsApp groups and more. Awali a cara tá fáilte is fitherót ar an show agus tám thar bheith buíochtaíod as a bhelinn.
Gurb míle maigad daoine tám thar bheith sásta bheith anseo.
Well, Mollie, we are so grateful to have you here with us, and thank you so much for generously giving of your time to join us here today. Mollie, what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, as I do with all of our guests here on the show, is maybe go back to the very beginning and how Irish kind of what it looked like in your life growing up and going through school and so on here in Ireland.
Yeah, so thankfully I had a very positive experience, especially in primary school. It was not a Gael school, so not an Irish medium school, but a lot of Irish was spoken and the teachers would always converse in Irish together and the instructions around the yard and the school were all through Irish. So that was really nice. And we had some family friends who spoke Irish at home, and my mum was an Irish, primary school teacher. So she would have a great level of Irish, and now and then we'd speak Irish at home, but at school, it just felt very natural and very normal, at least in primary school. And I think back to being around 7 years old, I was teaching my American cousins Irish and kind of realizing like, do you have any other languages, or how does this work? So, and I was so excited to kind of explore that with my cousins and so curious because it really lit something in me to be able to describe and explain what Irish is and how we learn it at school. And I felt a great sense of pride actually in that. And then I think in secondary school, it changed a little. I loved English. That was my favorite subject. I loved history and Spanish and French. And I think learning Irish, it just didn't feel relevant. It didn't feel meaningful or, exciting enough. And I don't think the materials were very, vibrant or useful. And my parents said, well, off to the Gaeltacht with you, and get a high level for your junior cert. And so I went off age 13, and that was brilliant to be really immersed in the living language and to feel people live here and they speak Irish. This was in Tullach in Connemara near Spiddle, and I just loved it. And
But it wasn't all plain sailing
yeah,
to begin with, was it?
no, well, I got kicked out.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks for reminding me.
I did notice that in the Irish Times article. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I'll never get over it. I'm still very bitter, They never really gave me a warning. So I was sent home on the train from Galway to Dublin and argued my case back in. I wanted to be a lawyer at that stage. And so I was like, well, that was not fair at all. You never gave me a chance, But it was a very strict Coláiste. And so I went back the following year on a scholarship. And then I kept going back and became head girl. And I did well in the leaving cert. And then I felt like there weren't enough spontaneous opportunities to use Irish. And I think that is somewhat still the case in Ireland, but things do seem to be looking up on that front. But I studied English at Trinity. I became interested in teaching. I teach dance and English. And then I was traveling and I was, moving all around the world and just became more and more fascinated by Irish history and Irish culture and what makes us Irish and what is worth holding on to. So I started teaching Irish and kind of transferred my skills then.
Fantastic, fantastic, and that's something that I want to dive into very much more deeply here. But perhaps just to pick up on that, because something that I came across, sorry, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot in relation, but I just thought it was a wonderful story that the fact that you persisted with the Gaeltacht despite that start, and that's a question I wonder about sometimes. How do you feel about that whole, that quite strict, philosophy sometimes of expelling people if they don't speak the language and conform. How do you feel about that now, looking back on it?
I think it was dangerously punitive. I think there is so much kind of harshness around the language that it really defines and dictates your future in Ireland. You are associating the language with an exam that will let you enter university or not, which I don't think is helpful or healing or in any way beneficial to a teenager or a young person growing up. And language learning is all really about psychology and about our social and, emotional response to how we express ourselves and how we communicate. So my students all over the world and, more and more from Ireland now are realizing that if you associate language learning with love and family and passion and joy and fun, you're going to learn it. It'll be quicker for you to learn. It'll be more effective. But if you're stressed because you need to get this many points to get into this course and Irish might hold you back and it's seen as a very, challenging and mysterious language, without ever really being given the tools to see it as a simple, clear, logical, patterned, structured and consistent language, which it is. So I think in a way, the strictness of the Irish College was great. And I do appreciate that they have such high standards. And even when I went as an adult to Idris Gael in Donegal, I didn't hear many of the students speaking Irish outside of the college. And I was like, come on, lads, this is how it works. We go to the pub, we all speak in Irish, play your music, speak Irish, And there were a few groups that would really encourage each other. And I felt that's the essence of it. You really need to, this tomadorach, like just dive in and have total immersion because it's really the best way, I think. And also that involves, the releasing of shame that you nearly have to embrace this childlike innocence of, I make mistakes, but having language parents around me, people to guide me, people to love me and to using the language better and flourishing.
But isn't that such a huge? I mean, there's so much to that, Molly. I mean, that whole thing about as adult learners that we are so averse to making mistakes and to being to being subject to correction and so on. Whereas of course as children learners we just blurt it out and
Yeah,
it's that's you get told no it is an aim to say whatever um and that's how we learn but and I think as Irish adults coming back to it, I think there's a double whammy if you like because you have the fact that as adults we don't like to be making in inverted commas stupid mistakes at all, but as well then we have this kind of baggage of the languages and our experience with it in school for many people. But I because I just want to pick up there on that on that because I saw you mention it in the Irish Times article when just preparing for this, and you mentioned this thing about when you are learning in secondary school. I mean, here if you've been through the Irish education system, you on one part of your class where you're learning about how to speak about homelessness or social problems, and you're learning off an essay to literally just nail a particular title that might come up in the essay or a particular theme of a poem that you're able to hit so many kind of points that you need to but you're not actually really spending an awful lot of time engaging with the language itself other than just how do you actually pass this exam.
exactly. That's it. And I find, I had been teaching one-to-ones online for years, and I would have students without this baggage with the language and without having learned a script for the Leaving Cert. And they're just open to it and they absorb it. And because they're associating it with passion and pride and respect and responsibility, they are really going for it and really having amazing results and able to be active learners and confident learners and independent learners. And I think that's the aim as a teacher, creating materials that are really functional and bring the language to life. And yet sometimes I would meet 18-year-olds about to sit their Leaving Cert, and I would prepare them for the oral, and I realized they're not even using different tenses. They're just like, what kind of conversation in real life have we ever had where I'm like, okay, Finine, tell me about your family, and you go on for 2 sentences. Now your hobbies, and 2 more sentences. And where are you going next week? It never works like that. I
Mm-hmm.
think it would be wonderful to focus on spontaneous, authentic conversation and to release people from that kind of the pressure and the urgency of the exams, and to
Mm-hmm.
make it like they do in Quebec with French, children just learning the language and loving and playing through the language and treating it like a language and not a subject. And I think a lot of this probably comes from being in an English centric or English speaking country and having
Mm-hmm.
been colonized by an English, the English speakers,
Mm-hmm.
that if we were colonized by another country that see language as not just something utilitarian, we, like a lot of people in the States, like in the UK, people who grow up in an English speaking environment generally don't understand how language works in a way, or don't have the right tools and the right mindset
Yeah,
on how
because
to
the
approach
English
language
language
learning.
is well, I suppose one of its great features is it's so widely spoken internationally. But it means then if you're an English language speaker, you almost kind of get a pass. You don't have to,
Yeah,
engage with other languages to the same extent.
exactly. And when I was teaching English, I was teaching for language academies and traveling. And I was thinking that English is, contributing to language loss. And language loss means a huge loss of cultural wealth and of heritage and of connection that people have. And it's something that I think we can see how English in Ireland was associated during the famine, especially with advancement and progress and the future. And Irish was associated with poverty and backwardness. And now Ireland is such a different place. So that allows us to make Irish and the learning of Irish more conducive to growth and happiness and healing. And
Mm.
it's proven, with intergenerational trauma, that learning about culture and learning about language can be incredibly revealing about our identity. And people are finding it really something so valuable to them.
Mm. Well, that's incredibly that's incredibly powerful, Molly, incredibly deep, and I want to go into that because because it's precisely that whole question of healing and connection with the past that I think is very meaningful for you. But just before we get to that, can I just say, so you were teaching English internationally? Then how did Irish kind of emerge as a thing that ultimately led to you establishing the phenomenon that is now Irish with Molly? Where did that come from, if you like, in terms of, did you see, was there a demand for that, or how did it kind of unfold as you were going along?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how things make sense backwards and everything is linked. And I was teaching English. I love teaching. I was, looking into more methodologies and really getting into it, but realizing, is my passion really in English teaching or is it in teaching and in
Mm-hmm.
languages? So I was teaching online and I was about to set sail on the Peace Boat, which is a UN sponsored NGO, and sail around the world teaching Zumba and English. And I thought, okay, I'll go online and teach. I was teaching like 10 hours a day, basically, and saving up for this Peace Boat. And then the language platform said, oh, you're Irish. Can you teach Irish? And I was thinking, I'm sure I could. I have a high level of Irish. I'm able to apply what I know about teaching a language into teaching Irish. And the more I looked online at materials and things, I thought they're not really geared towards the learner. So I started creating a lot of materials and really breaking it down into simple designs like, when do we use the shevu? When do we use the uru? Why would you use tá and not the anchupel, the copula? And I found it really rewarding and really fulfilling. And I started teaching. My first student, I think, was a woman in Florida, and she wanted to propose to her Irish girlfriend in Irish. And I just had so much fun, kind of rediscovering the beauty of the language and creating a way of teaching it that meant I was looking at the etymology and the storytelling aspect of it. And why is this word, where does it come from? And how beautiful is it?
Oh yeah, and again, something that I really want to explore with you in a bit, but just on that, then what did Irish look like in your life at that stage? I mean, was it something that you were using on a regular basis, or was it just something you were reconnecting with, something that had been part of your life earlier in your life?
Yeah, I think it was being abroad at that stage and traveling made me feel this longing for home. And sometimes now and then I would speak Irish with my friends. Some of them had gone to Gaeilgeoir or my mum. And my grandmother was in a nursing home and she was a Gaeilgeoir. So I would call her and her hearing was terrible and she wouldn't understand me in English. So when I switched to Irish, we had the best conversations. And I think that was really a turning point that I started, like I say, about the association. I was really associating this coacht, this power with koa, homesickness. And I was feeling that's how I can feel at home. And a lot of people tell me that they feel like they belong when they speak Irish and it's in their soul and they really feel soothed and comforted listening to Irish, even if they've never learnt or been to Ireland, they feel this with the language. So I I was teaching at a school at that stage and I was teaching online Irish, but at the school English. And I just felt so much more alive teaching Irish. And I said, I'm going to do this full time. So I did a lot of study. I went around Ireland and learned more and, read everything I could online and tried to kind of collect all this material and see how best to approach this. And my schedule online was just getting fuller and fuller. And I couldn't believe the demand. People in Ireland would be like, what? You've got someone in Russia at 4 a.m. in the morning who's getting up to learn Irish, or someone in Alaska, New Zealand, Hungary, all over the world. And they are emotional about learning Irish. They were literally bursting into tears, some people saying, oh, it's just so special to me. I don't know how to describe it. And I loved how, like you said, I was kind of rediscovering it in my mid 20s. I had a good level of Irish. I got an A in the Leaving Cert honours, but I never really understood it properly until I was teaching it. And I love this idea that when you're teaching something, and I encourage all my students to just teach what they know, you don't need to be at this level or that level. Just teach what you know, and enjoy it and explore it with people, because that's what gives it life. So I was really, really busy teaching, and then the pandemic hit, and I realized even more people were getting on board and saying, this is my lifelong passion. I've been thinking and dreaming about learning Irish for years, and now is the time. And people were stuck at home and wanted, you know, lessons online. And then a student of mine met Manco McGann in the States, and he told him about me. And I said, oh, wow, you were talking to the High King of Ireland there. And I emailed him and I said, Mancon, I'm thinking about making a documentary about my students, because they are fascinating and they're all over the world. And their rate of their learning is just propelling them into great heights. Like, they are phenomenal at Irish. And because they're just so open to it and they absorb everything. And I told him about this idea, and he said, do you know what? 99% of the time when people write to me about an idea for a TV show or a documentary, my heart falls, because I know it won't be commissioned and there's no chance it'll ever be on TV or whatever. But with this is an amazing story, and you've really got something here. So he put me in touch with a few people, and I interviewed some of my students, and their stories were incredible. And that's one of my favorite things about what I do, getting these messages from people, even with phonetic, memories of, my grandfather used to say this. What does that mean? So I started kind of creating that. And then I realized I've so many students and not enough time, and I'm teaching the same things again and again. I could create a system where I'm teaching more people, freeing up my time to create more materials, more content. So I started Irish with Mollie, which is like an Instagram and TikTok page. And then I created courses. So the beginner course, the intermediate course, and a new course coming out in January. And it's been brilliant. It's really been so fulfilling and so connecting for me, and such a, I do webinars every week or so. And sometimes there's 5,000 people on a webinar, and they are, the energy and the appetite for Irish is so palpable. And the gratitude people have, it's so beautiful. And they're saying, I feel a lot of people from the States are saying, thank you for doing this for us, as if they need this connection with Ireland. And it's an absolute privilege to be able to teach, and a pleasure, to teach Irish. And I listened to a great episode of yours with Gary Bannister recently, and he was saying how he really envisions a bilingual Ireland in 2053. And it sounds a bit outrageous, but at the same time, you have to believe in that. If you're working towards that, like he is, and like I am, like you are, we have to trust that that will happen. Why else would we be doing what we're doing? We have to imagine that and visualize it and make it happen. And that's how things come into fruition, I think.
Oh, completely. I mean, because we don't know what we don't know, and as you said, like it makes sense backwards, these things sometimes. But it's from where we are. Sometimes looking forward, it seems these things are, we just can't even imagine them because they haven't happened yet. But that's incredible, Molly. But listen, but on that, so just let me just dive into Irish with Molly just in a little bit more detail, because that's extraordinary. That scale of participation is just that's really exceptional and just wonderful to hear. But what does that look like for you now in your life? Does I mean yes, you obviously had to kind of, if you like, rationalize your time. There's only so many people that you can reach one on one, I expect. And there's only so many hours in the day, so I presume you took a different approach in terms of trying to reach more people. But what does it look like for you now in terms of your use of the language on a daily basis? I mean, is that something? What kind? Because one of the things you mentioned as well was opportunity for usage, and that being an issue. So how does all of that, like, in your day-to-day life now, what does that look like?
So I create flashcards and then reels. So every second I would create 10 flashcards, on a topic like Sagittarius season. So the personality traits of a Sagittarius, and then how to say like, I'm a Sagittarius, are you a Sagittarius, etc. And then things like, Gaeilgeoir is the archer. And people love these sounds and it's all got audio. So that's on Instagram. So content creation takes up a good bit of my time. And then on Reels, I love to explore the kind of intricacies of Hiberno English and how we are really speaking Irish using English words in Ireland. And people don't really get it. It's a bit like they're too in it. The people in Ireland, a lot of people don't really know how much Irish they know, and they don't really understand how much Irish they're using. Like Colin Barrades of on Colleen Q, and the director said, Irish is really haunting how we speak. And I saw a quote from Tommy Tiernan here. He was saying, that the English language is all grammar and rules, and the Irish soul is a much more fluid thing. And he's leaping around the stage. And he says, the reason I curse so much is not because of my lack of vocabulary. It's because I'm an Irish person. I'm an Irish person speaking the English language, and the English language doesn't suit my soul. And soul is a word that keeps coming up again and again. But back to your question. So then I create reels, and on the courses, people will comment. So there's video content and quizzes and exercises. So every day I might have 20 or 30 comments and questions. And I love responding to those. So that takes a good bit of time. And we have an open Zoom room, 24/7 open. So joining that and conversing with my students and helping them, with different things. We're going to do a speaking event next year where they can speak on any topic for 1 to 2 minutes. So people are editing those as we speak. And also collaborating with other content creators, like ones who teach Scottish Gaelic, for example, and kind of looking at the distinctions between our sister languages, if you will. And people sometimes getting in touch about translations they would like. I do a lot of, sometimes people will message me, Mollie, I've got a tattoo appointment in 20 minutes. Is this correct? And it's never correct. So I care so much. I'm like, hang on, don't get that tattoo. But it's very diverse, and there's a lot of opportunities to use the language. I write a weekly newsletter, so it's bilingual, and I tend to put, Irish first and then English, and kind of these chunks that can be useful for people that are conversational, and then highlighting maybe pubs around Dublin that you can speak Irish in freely, or different customs and traditions of Ireland and different historical things. So in a great way, it's brought so much of the language into my life. It's really penetrated everything I do, that now more than ever, I'm really living in the language, which is
Yeah, what
great.
does that look like for you outside of teaching and Irish with Mollie? I mean, do you get opportunities to use the language as part of your daily life?
Yeah, so my mum, I've kind of forced her into a few trips where we only speak Irish. So we went to the Dingle Peninsula a few weeks ago, and we had a great time. We went out to the Blasket Island, and it was so special to be there. And I really felt a newfound kind of appreciation for all of those writers and the history that's there. And I think I can see that really emerging with other Irish people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, coming back, and all ages, coming back to the language and realizing how precious it is and what we are at risk of losing. And people are kind of shocked to hear that Irish is definitely endangered. It's 3 steps away from extinct. And I do see, a lot of hope on TV, on radio. You see a lot more Irish, I think, and people just using a cúpla focal here and there. Blind Boy started his podcast last week with Bula Bus, clapping hands, which was really nice to hear. But I do find there's many more opportunities to use Irish, and I think I should practice what I preach. So when I'm at the shop or whatever, I'll just throw in a Gurv Magat, thank you, etc. And it's a constant exercise in shame or in confidence that you have to just get over it, because I completely understand people saying, I'm too shy to use the Zoom room, or I'm too shy to use my Irish, no matter what their level is like. But learning Irish unshackles us from the judgment of it. It's like you have to, I'm a cold water swimmer, and and my sister-in-law says a great thing, just do 10 strokes, and by that stage you will have forgotten. So the message is like, just do it, and the shock will wear off, and you'll start enjoying it, you know.
Once you get started, once you get moving, it'll all start to happen. Yeah, but you've got to take that initial sort of plunge into the into the icy
Hmm.
cold water
Yeah,
to get
exactly.
going. Yeah, but it's also, I suppose, but there are these popular misconceptions as well. I think, Molly, that because I just, a couple of other things that resonated with me from listening to what you had to say about it. But like one of the things, for instance, is, there's this association of difficulty with the language, or suggestion of difficulty with the language, particularly, and you mentioned this, you alluded to this earlier, but particularly I think as English learners, English speaking people, and most of us in Ireland are native English speakers to begin with. I mean, they've, unfortunately, that was a historical fact. um, and and so when we come to the language, we're coming to it with an English language um, mindset and
Mm.
whole conditioning. And so
Yeah.
it's suddenly saying, oh well, wait a minute, these sounds are all difficult and it doesn't make any sense. But I mean, Worcester sauce, anybody? I mean, you know what I mean? Have you ever seen that written down? I mean, what about knives and knights and various different things, which nobody has any kind of, there's nobody out there saying, the English is a strange language with difficult sounds. Whereas on the other hand, Irish is extremely consistent, and once you kind of come from the position of saying it isn't actually English, people. It's you know what I mean, and the letters, while they use in the Roman print, we use the same letters, but they don't actually. So like A isn't the first letter of the alphabet; it's the fifth letter of the alphabet, and A is the first letter of the alphabet, and so on. Um, what about that whole question about how there's this perception of the language being difficult and inaccessible, but it's really just about approaching it on its own terms.
Definitely. It is all about mindset, motivation, and method. And these are three things that we really struggle with in Ireland. How you see something is, such a determining factor in how it is. So, realistically and factually, Irish is not a difficult language. Of course, anything is difficult to learn. Anything at all. Like spreading butter on your toast is difficult when you're a child, to get it right. So, I think maybe it was also I lived in the Basque country and in Hungary, and those two languages are listed on the top 10 most difficult languages in the world. And Irish isn't. And like you say, Irish is super consistent. It is full of patterns, and it's like kind of, maths was never my thing at school, but it's kind of like a mathematician's dream. It is so logical. There's all these, you know, beautiful kind of it echoes back, with the verb answering the verb. And there's all these kind of tricks and clues that can help us learn Irish that should be common knowledge. And like, there's only 11 irregular verbs in Irish, and there's about 220 in English, and other languages have hundreds more. And it has so many quirky and interesting aspects, like no word for yes or no, and no verb to have, and only 18 letters. But I suppose everyone says of a language, the great thing about Czech is, or the great thing about Spanish is, you read it exactly as it's written. And that's actually true of Irish too. It sounds exactly as it's written. It's just people don't expect with their English speaking mind, they don't expect that a TH sounds like h, or an MH could sound like v or w. And it's just to be learned. I always say practice, patience, persistence. And when you have the passion is there. So,
Completely, and it's just, but it's so many things but like that we're not taught, or at least that it seems to me that are often taken for granted or assumed. You know, because I come
yeah.
back as an adult learner. For instance, the whole question of quail the quail and lahan the lahan, the idea of that, on either side of a consonant, if we have a slender vowel on one side, we've got to have a slender vowel on the other side. If we've got a broad vowel on one side, we've got a broad vowel on the other. But okay, I had heard that thing, for years. Never knew what it meant, and my spelling in Irish, my spelling in English is terrible. My spelling in Irish is appalling. But I just never kind of got that. Um,
Mhm.
and um, and I never really got that H's were actually not really letters that are used in the Irish language other than in loan words, apart from, when they come in as shevus. But I suppose the point that I'm coming to here is, if somebody sat down and explained to you, well, actually, the reason for the broad and the slender is because it changes the sound of the consonant, so that therefore, if you have an S-I, it's going to be a sh, as opposed to an SO, which is going to be a so. So it's how the vowel influences the consonant on either side of it, and and how that's always going to be the case. And if you see those two things together, you're able to pronounce those words, just, and you can pronounce them from beginning to end. But nobody, or seems to me like we never, because it's almost like it's assumed that we've gone so beyond basics that, that's just,
Yeah,
that would be wasteful to explain that to people. But like, I don't remember anybody ever sitting down and saying, this is the fundamental building blocks of the language and here's how you pronounce it as a learner.
exactly. Yes, I completely agree. And I think it's so worth it, even if at the beginning, like in my courses, I say the 7 features of the language, in the beginner course. And it's basically they're there because of the ease and flow of pronunciation, which sounds bizarre, but it's true. If you're asking a question, on nglanantu, the uru's there because of the on. So everything is so connected and so beautifully structured for that kind of cadence and that current of speech. And it makes sense. It's like, you know, saying antenna with no shevu, and it's kind of the exception and being feminine because it's easier to say. It's always like, check it out, put it in your mouth, go antenna and then antenna. Of course, antenna is much easier to say. So if you kind of play with it and realize it's all happening in the mouth, and like you say, learning these building blocks is so useful and so valuable. I think people underestimate the power of that. I was speaking to a primary school teacher and he said, the kids know that fuinog is window. And then they kind of stress out when they think, why is there a H there with the on inyog? Why? And it's like, let's introduce that from the very beginning, even if it's planting seeds. Just saying, this will come up later, but this is really important because those things like lahan and quail, the broad and slender and the masculine and feminine nouns, etc., they are integral to understanding and appreciating the language. They are 100% fundamental, I think. And it's the only way people are going to be comfortable speaking it and understanding it. Because, like you say, people are kind of dragged up through a system where they're like, I know what I'm saying is correct, or I think this has this ending, but they don't really know why. And the whys are maybe the most beautiful aspect of the language.
Oh, completely. Oh, completely. I mean, it's like these little things that I find myself stumbling across now, and I go like, "Wait, why did nobody ever say this to me before?" But like, it's like I was reading. Now, this is how sad my life gets. I was reading the Christian Brothers, the grammar, and that brought her Christie. And I was reading the first. I just started reading from the beginning, because at the beginning in the first chapter, they start going through all the sounds of the letters and what they're all like. And again, like it's like, because you're used to seeing the first letter of the alphabet and saying that it's A, but in Irish it's A, and the fifth letter is E in English, but in Irish it's A. It's RTR, RTA, and but in anyway, and in this grammar book, they have this thing where if on the definite article on the appears before a consonant, we don't pronounce the N. And so it's like Farati, the N isn't pronounced. And this is like, nobody ever told me that. And it's like it's these very, very basic little things about Irish that in a way, and I think part of it is to do with the fact that I think, and this is no criticism of teachers of the language, but I mean, I think it's being taught nationwide through the education system by a lot of people whom have to acquire a certain level of proficiency in order to be able to teach it, but probably maybe don't use the language outside of their actual job apart from that. And so therefore, if you like, some of the teaching of the language is possibly by people who aren't as proficient in the language as you might think in the first place.
Mhm. True. And even my mum, who went to St. Pat's and was a primary school teacher for years, she said she only found out about masculine and feminine nouns in her 40s, after about 20 years of teaching how they work, how they change, and why it's important to teach them. And
Hmm.
I would introduce them in a basic beginner lesson, like, check this out. When you see a broad ending or a slender ending, this is what it means, because it changes the spelling and the sound. And it's just an interesting feature of the language as well. But I think you're right. There's a lot that would make more sense if it was introduced, and it brings so much richness to the language.
Mm. Oh, completely. And I suppose maybe I think it's probably maybe a certain um, a feature of we're both Irish, having come through the Irish education system, and so we got to just there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. But talk more to me about what it looks like, because you say you have learners coming internationally now from. I mean, and that's just extraordinary. The kind of numbers of people that you see on your webinars. But what is motivating those learners, and where are they coming from in relation to the language, or what how do you see, and what levels of proficiency do you see people achieving who are coming to language in that way?
So at the beginning of the webinar, I always have polls and I say, what motivates you? Why are you learning Irish? And there's family and friends, there's heritage and identity, other, and a trip to Ireland. And it's always about 70 or 80% of people who respond say heritage and identity. It is so important to them and so special to honor, their past, their ancestors. They feel Ireland is their home. A lot of people around the world. And I think the beautiful thing is with globalization and, people moving to Ireland and appreciating Irish culture. I have so many Ukrainians in Ireland learning, and Brazilians, and saying, like, this is amazing. Like, now I understand why you speak like that in English. And they really get it and they really connect the two. So some of my students are people who've been trying to learn Irish for years. They've tried lots of books and teachers and apps, and they think it's all over the place. It's so disorganized, where like they want kind of personalized tuition, or they want it to be broken down into digestible, you know, accessible content. And then others are people who have moved to Ireland. Maybe their grandchildren have an Irish parent, but they themselves are from some other country, and they're really, really keen to connect with their Irish family in that way. And other people, maybe they're studying for an exam, or they're trying to become a primary school teacher. And with the courses, like currently I've created up to intermediate, which is B2 in the Common European Framework of Languages. And the students, some of them are incredibly motivated. They're just, you know, binge watching the course like a Netflix show and saying, okay, I'm finished. Where's the next course? Like, now I'm coming to Ireland. I can understand all the street signs. I'm going into the pubs. I'm ordering in Irish. And it's really, really uplifting to see. And I think very inspirational for Irish people to notice, wow, we've got something very sacred here, and something that other people are really, eager to learn. And what does that mean for Irishness? You think of the Irish pub and Irish dancing, Irish music, and they have very positive connotations, very warm and welcoming kind of atmosphere around them. But the Irish language has this controversial, you know darkness in some ways around it, or people have this shame. And I read on your website, on your blog, Finine, about, having changed your mind about the language at some stage and realizing how much you appreciate it and you want to nurture it, and you really have looked at it from a different angle. And I think that's that's I think what's happening maybe collectively now, which is very cool, that it's kind of coming more into the arts. I notice more artists using Irish in a poster, even if they're not fluent. There's more of an embrace of effectiveness, that I just want to be able to say this thing, and it's okay that I'm not 100% fluent. So people are, yeah, more maybe accepting themselves more in that way.
Yeah, and giving themselves a bit of a break in relation to the whole thing, I think,
Yeah.
is part of it. Yeah, you just mentioned that because as we're talking here today, I just remember seeing somewhere in the last little while, I think Fontaine's DC and Kneecap, I think, I saw them maybe collaborating on something, and I just because there is this really, you know, huge sort of groundswell of of a kind of a hunger for the use of the language in so many aspects of our artistic lives, and it's wonderful to see. But there was a quote that jumped out for me, Molly. That, and I think this ties in to an awful lot both of Irish people, because I think and my history in it, and I think a lot of Irish people's history in it. I think this is, and again, this is something I need to explore, but and I don't have the kind of qualification or vocabulary maybe to describe this as how it should be, but I think there is this cognitive dissonance that we have in relation to the language, where it's our native language but we can't speak it, and that leaves us feeling somehow inadequate, or incomplete, or it certainly leaves us with some difficult to resolve issues, and for a lot of people, then I think the thing is to say, well, then the easiest way to get this to resolve this feeling is to reject or remove the language from our kind of just to denigrate it, and then we can kind of, if you like, we can it's apart from us, because we can just slag it off and give out about the fact of the way that it's taught and that it's a dead language and all of that, um and but because having to engage with it is difficult, and it puts us in the situation where we have to make mistakes and be corrected, and feel foolish, and all of that. So yes, definitely there's a lot going on there. But there was a wonderful quote that I saw you mentioned by John O'Donoghue, the wonderful West of Ireland poet and philosopher, and his wonderful book Anam Cara is one that I'm just rereading now at the moment. But he has a quote that you mentioned about, when you steal a language um, from a people, you leave their soul bewildered, and I think that's just such that's there's such depth in that. But talk to me, Molly, about that whole thing, the healing thing that you mentioned about the language, and how that feeds in to how you make the language interesting and meaningful, and this idea that has come up again and again with so many people we've spoken to here, about this idea of connecting with our ancestors and continuing a thing, to feel part of a continuum of which your ancestors are part of. And I suppose that's something that is relevant for Irish people living in Ireland who've grown up in Ireland, but also for people of Irish descent who are internationally, who are maybe wanting to connect in a more remote kind of way. Sorry, there's a lot there now, but if you
Yeah.
just, that's all
I'm
picking
enjoying
up.
it.
Yeah, that's all coming from your from what I've been reading around what you've been saying about the language.
Yeah, I think sustaining linguistic diversity and ensuring that the language is not lost, and trying to connect this healing process of learning or relearning our ancestral language, our native language, has so many mental health benefits. We know already that learning a language can reduce and delay dementia and Alzheimer's. It increases concentration, memory, motivation, self esteem, and reduces anxiety. And people, I talk to people who learn Indigenous languages and teach them in Australia, Alaska, and different parts of the US, and they say that it is transformative how communities who are relearning a language, that has in some ways been lost or is fading, it helps with a lot of mental health issues. And I think, Ireland has clear scars from colonization and from just so much battering over time. Like when you think of the Irish language and how it's still existing, it's still surviving, and it's been through the Norman invasion, statutes of Kilkenny, British colonial rule, the famine, death, emigration, urbanization, modernization, educational policies, and still there is this drive to learn it. And people always mention it's our soul language. And it's hard to put your finger on it, and it's a hard one to argue if it were. But like arguing doesn't bring you to the, I think it's called eudaimonic happiness. This happiness from self improvement and learning and progress, kind of the opposite of instant gratification. But people really feel that. They feel very grounded in their history and very connected with themselves, and maybe even in ways that they can't explain, but realizing that's why I think the way I do. That's the humor in my family. That's the tenderness of my grandparents, and remembering the ways in which the world was created for them by their ancestors. Like, I'm always realizing things that seem very obvious. Like, we're Irish people speaking a foreign language right now. Or am I doing this to keep my grandmother alive in a way that, she passed away 2 years ago, and she has really inspired me on this whole journey. And in many ways, of course, we're trying to capture something that's in the past, and we're trying to, you know, keep it alive, and also how integral it is to who we are. I saw a group of Italians the other day, for example, and they were all greeting each other with, brio, which comes from the Proto-Celtic word brig, meaning strength. And they were full of life, and they were like, Luigi, just hugging and kissing. And I thought, imagine if you just said to them, now you have to speak Polish, all of you. And they're like, oh, we can't speak Polish. Oh, but you have to. You're going to be banned from this establishment if you don't, or you're going to be kicked out of the country if you don't speak Polish. They'd be like, what? And even if they had a basic level of Polish, would they be able to interact and communicate and express themselves in the same way? No, there are even words in Italian that don't exist in Polish. And that's kind of what happened in Ireland in a much more dramatic way. You know, and I think a lot of people deal with it or have had very different experiences. I have so many students from the States who say that it skipped a generation, or their grandparents didn't let them speak Irish, or they used it as a code language, or they used it as a secret language at home, and they were ashamed of it. Or some people remember their grandparents or great grandparents like trying to reduce their accent and speaking in a mirror and practicing English to reduce their Irish accent. And it's very sad, but it's so telling that there are thousands of people all over the world who are really drawn to the music of the Irish language and what it means to them. And it's clearly something so connected to their sense of self, and something they are invested in.
Wow, that's so powerful, and that's so true, I think. And I just want to congratulate you and thank you for the work that you are doing in enabling people to reconnect with that, at such a scale. That's phenomenal. So just mahu and Gaurav Mahagat. But Mollie, just because as we come towards the end of our time together here today we'll have to come back to this again another day. But just in the time we have now, I want to just maybe, in the context of what you just described there, maybe come back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier on, and that's about the future of the language. And there were two things that kind of that struck me as you were saying. One was you were very optimistic about the language, and you referenced Gary Bannister's. I mean, his prediction. I'm going out to actually Paddy Power. I'm going to put a bet on. I think for 2054. So there's this great reason to be hopeful and optimistic and encouraged by what's happening internationally online, and the Gaelscoil movement here in Ireland. There's so many things. The younger, there's a younger generation that's coming forward that has been immersed in the language and are really, really powerful and passionate about it. But you also mentioned that you've said it's 3 steps away from from extinction on some level. So how do we reconcile those two things? What's your take on where do you what's your feeling for the future of the language?
I suppose the thing is, it all comes back to mindset because the knowledge is there. The power to harness the language is there. In the latest census, 40% of Irish people said they can speak the language. 40%. Only 10% of them said they speak it well, and 25% said they never speak it. So, what can we do to change that statistic? 25% never using it. Is it because of lack of opportunity? Is it because of lack of confidence? Is it because who knows? But I think a lot of it is around the perception of Irish, that it's too difficult and it's not, or that you have no one to speak to, but you do. Like now with digitalization and different communities popping up, like you say, urban Gaeltachts and more Gael Scullina. There's a lot of parents there who are sending their children to Gael School, and they want to create communities and speak Irish, even if they're operating with a very basic level or they're a bit self, you know, overly self-aware of their skills. But I think the mindset and kind of making it seem more natural and helping people to get over their fear is really the biggest thing. you know Even myself, thinking like I'm not a Gaeilgeoir from birth. I didn't grow up with Irish as my first language. And to think like, if that holds you back, there is no future for the language. Even, and everyone has these self-limiting beliefs, and they're so unhelpful that it could mean the loss of all this rich culture. That the language is a vehicle for expression and for identity and Irishness. I love to explore this idea of Irishness, and what does it mean? And I think people really value the Irish language in that. But what are they doing? So many people say to me, I wish I could speak Irish. I wish I had your level of Irish. I wish I had a teacher like you. I wish I had a community to speak with. I wish I heard Irish spoken. Stop wishing. It can be a symbol of Irishness, or is it an act of Irishness? So turn it from a symbol into an act, even if it's simply saying Gurv Mahagat, thank you, Gurv Mahagat, when you go to the shop. People love to hear Irish. Of course, you might get a weird
Oh,
look now and then, but
that's so powerful. Stop wishing and start doing. I mean, that's phenomenal, Molly. But on that though, I mean, just you mentioned you were in Corcacuina recently, and you were down there, and you're not a native speaker. You're somebody who's on a learning journey. You're just way out there in front. At the moment, but how do you feel when you get to the Gaeltacht? Do you feel how do you interact? Is there any sense? What does that look like for you?
yeah, I found it like it was a very positive experience overall, and I really love to see, the language community and hearing kids playing in Irish and parents and just like people living naturally, and it's no big deal for them. They just live their life through Irish, and that's incredible. I did go and speak at a festival in Ballybunion, and there were a lot of people, and it felt a little bit hostile in the beginning, because I think they might have been like, who's this one from Dublin, telling us about all the magic of the language, and we know. But then thankfully, over the course of the talk and maybe after the hour, I could feel them softening, and I was like, okay, I've got you now. And they were so kind and so encouraging and saying like, you need to go into schools, you need to do this and that, you need to, you're right. And it's like they value the language and love the language, but maybe they're not confronted with the reality of, what will it take to make Ireland bilingual? And it's great to be using the language and having it as an act and an expression of Irishness, but it's also important to, yeah, to be very open to people using it and not labeling them, oh, you're not a Gaeilgeoir. It's like, what does it even mean? I am an Irish speaker. You're not a native speaker, but I am from Ireland and I'm an Irish speaker, not from birth. But there's a lot of these restrictions that people have on each other. And I think making it more accessible, relevant, and modernizing it is the key.
I think that's very, very powerful, Molly, and thank you for sharing that with us now, because I think that's a really, really powerful message, and one that I struggle with a great deal. Because you mentioned the sense of belonging, and that people, want the language sense of belonging. But I feel sometimes when I go and try and engage, with a native community, I feel that I definitely don't belong here, because
Mhm.
I'm not, I'm just not competent or proficient here, and and for me, then I tend to oftentimes just revert to English, because we both know that we speak English fluently, right? There are no monoglot Irish speakers left, um, and I always struggle with that, in the Gaeltacht, and this is not any reflection of Gaeltacht people that they don't, but it's 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 a thing that I constantly run up against, and so thank you for sharing with us here, because it's very, very important to be to be aware of these things, and then I think we can get past them if we can just come and approach them in a different way.
Yeah, and I think communication is always two ways. Do you communicate to show off how great your level is, or do you communicate to be understood?
Hmm.
And inclusivity needs to be at the fore there, and accessibility, and letting people feel you belong no matter what your level is. You're clearly showing a passion and an eagerness to speak the language. So let's embrace that, and let's, you know, make that such a positive force for the language. Like if you think of, in many ways, Ireland being like a tree, the trunk of the tree, and it has decayed and rotted over time, but its branches spread out all around the world. And those branches have flowers just blossoming, and then seeds falling and nurturing and bringing nutrients back into the tree. And I really think that's what's happening with Irish learning, that there are these
Wow.
people, and I hear of a new person every day, and it's like, wow, they learned Irish to fluency in like 3 years, and now they report on the news in Zimbabwe or in this place or that place. And it's like, that's incredible. That's so inspiring. And it really teaches us of what's possible. And I was thinking also of this idea of accessibility that, we tend to think, but am I, yeah, do I belong to that community, or will I be judged? When I was in Trinity, I was the officer for students with disabilities, and there was a big move, big project to break the oldest cobblestones in Ireland in Front Square and introduce the paths to make it more accessible. And I think in some ways it's like creating new pathways into the Irish language, that it is so ancient and exists in different social kind of rules or arenas. And yet, the only way it will survive and it will flourish is if we kind of break through and make it more accessible for everyone and say, come on in, this is your language too. Okay, if you grew up in, you know, wherever, you're allowed to learn the language and you're allowed to speak with us and you're welcome here. Like, there shouldn't be an air of superiority or reluctance to involve people. Or so many people have stories of being told that's wrong, or even the simplest things like you're saying, "Kuna satatu" instead of "kajay martatu." It's like, who cares,
I was I was at Anya Gallagher recently in Dubarras, and she talks about being heckled because she makes a grammatical mistake in Irish. You're going, what? I mean, like, who feels that they can actually, heckle somebody because on their grammar? I mean, that's just
Yeah.
that only in Ireland could we actually do that. But no, but that is that there's so much that's so powerful what you touched on there. And I think that there's two things we need to bring together here. One is the new learners. I think the future is of the language is going to be the new learners, and I include myself as one of them. Um but also we have to have the on tubber the on insha the source of the language is the Gaeltacht. It's under threat and so vulnerable and so subject, so if you like, so vulnerable to the influence of English all of the time, because it's so all pervasive and all encroaching, and it's how we, I think, preserve and enable those two things is going to be key. But I mean, I think just what you were doing, enabling people to make that connection and providing that accessibility and creating that path, Mollie, it's absolutely extraordinary and just so wonderful to hear about. But so as we wrap up, what I'd like to ask you, Mollie, I feel you've answered this question in many ways already, but if you could just summarize it for us, is, and I ask this of every guest here, is what is your Irish language? Why? What is it that motivates you in relation to the language? Why do you do what you do? And, you know, and what drives you in all the work that you're doing for the language?
I think it's hard to put into words, but I think it's very very important to allow people a space to reconnect with who they are and how they feel at home. And people are craving niche communities. And what you can learn from the Irish language is so much tenderness and human kindness, and get so much joy from it. It's such a playful and funny language. And I think I love to be on that journey with people, and I love to reveal to them the different idiosyncrasies of the language and explore it with them. It just gives me so much life.
Wow. Well, and there could be no greater thing to be doing, Mollie, to be energized and filled with life in that way, in helping other people to reconnect and connect with this wonderful language. Awali akara garav mila mahagut buenos ansultas an scale arain tulin berbua agus banach the cara.
Gurv míle míle maigad bhain mé antat na bhas.
Thanks for listening. Gurav Mila Mahagut Asave Eishtucht. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would really appreciate your feedback and would be eternally grateful if you would follow, rate, and review the show. Please also be sure to sign up at thelanguagequestion.com/resources to get your free valuable learning resources and to stay up to date with upcoming episodes, guests, and to receive exclusive content. Slán Tamil.